I'll give you the Ferrari if you make it run. Millionaire insults a black man, not knowing. Malik Thompson stood silently in the middle of the glass showroom, surrounded by polished metal and mocking laughter. The luxury dealership gleamed under bright lights, yet the air felt heavy, tense. Phones were raised, whispers turning into quiet chuckles as the old man adjusted his worn cap and looked at the broken Ferrari in front of him. He was 72, his hands calloused from decades of work, but his posture carried the calm authority of a man who once built legends. Across the floor, Preston Wells leaned against a silver Bentley, his designer suit catching the light. The billionaire's smirk cut through the room as he pointed at the damaged Ferrari. "I'll give you this car if you can make it run," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His tone dripped with mockery, as if the challenge was a joke meant to humiliate. The crowd laughed on cue. Malik did not respond. His eyes held something deeper, a quiet kind of strength that arrogance could never touch. At the edge of the room, Tasha Brooks clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She wanted to defend her grandfather, but stayed silent. Every second felt heavier. The battle between dignity and disrespect had just begun. The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the glass walls of the dealership like cruel echoes. Every chuckle felt sharper than the last. Every whisper meant to pierce the quiet dignity Malik Thompson carried. Phones were raised higher now, flashes blinking as if capturing a circus act instead of a moment of injustice. Malik stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the gleaming red Ferrari that sat lifeless before him, a car once built for greatness, now reduced to a prop for humiliation. Preston Wells adjusted his cufflinks, his smug grin widening as he stepped closer. "You know," he said, his voice thick with arrogance, "some machines are meant for real engineers, not retirees with shaky hands. These new engines are smarter than the people who built the old ones." Laughter followed instantly, obedient and hollow. Malik's fingers brushed gently across the Ferrari's hood, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips. It was more than just steel and paint. It was memory. It was the kind of craftsmanship he had once poured his life into. For a moment, the noise around him faded. The sound of engines he once designed in Italy echoed faintly in his mind. Andre Bennett, the dealership's senior salesman, leaned toward Jason Mendez and whispered with a grin, "Let's see if the legend still remembers which end of the wrench to hold." Both laughed, pretending not to notice the uneasy glance from Tasha Brooks standing behind them. Tasha's face burned with embarrassment. She knew her grandfather's past, the awards, the patents, the nights spent designing engines that changed automotive history. But none of that mattered here. To these people, he was just an old black man who dared to walk into their shiny world. "Mr. Wells," she said firmly, stepping forward, "you do not have to do this." Preston turned his head slowly, the kind of turn that carried more insult than words ever could. "If he's half the genius you claim he is," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "then let him prove it. Or maybe the stories you tell about him are just bedtime myths." A low wave of laughter followed again, softer this time, yet sharper. Malik said nothing. He slowly rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms scarred by time and labor. The veins in his hands stood out as he crouched beside the Ferrari. There was no tremor, no hesitation, only precision. Preston raised an eyebrow, half amused, half curious. "Careful, old man. Would not want to scratch it, though I suppose that would not make much difference. It is already a dead car." Malik glanced at him once, calm and steady. "Sometimes," he said softly. "Things that look dead are only waiting for the right hands." The room fell slightly quieter. He opened the engine compartment with deliberate care. The crowd leaned in. The phone cameras zoomed closer. The smell of metal and oil filled the air, the silence broken only by the faint click of tools and the murmur of Malik's focused breathing. For the first time, laughter started to fade into whispers of curiosity. Jason Mendez tilted his head. "He actually knows what he's doing," he muttered. Malik's movements were graceful, almost rhythmic. He was not rushing, he was remembering. Each bolt, each wire, each sound spoke to him like an old language he had never forgotten. Preston crossed his arms, pretending not to care. "Do not tell me he is taking this seriously," he said, forcing a laugh. "It is a waste of time. 5 certified mechanics already said this car cannot be fixed." Tasha shot him a cold look. Maybe they did not know what to look for. Preston smirked. Or maybe your grandfather is chasing ghosts. Malik remained quiet. He inspected the wiring, the engine coils, the ignition path. Every inch of it told a story. There was something wrong, but not in the way everyone believed. It was not wear, it was intent. Someone had done this on purpose. He found faint tool marks near the fuel line, scratches where no mechanic should have touched. His brow furrowed slightly. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. Tasha watched closely, her breath held. "Grandpa," she whispered, "what is it?" He did not answer yet. Instead, he reached for his small tool pouch, the same one he had used decades ago in the Ferrari labs of Maranello. He loosened a few screws, adjusted a cable, and cleaned a small connection that had been intentionally blocked. The movements were simple, almost invisible, but the energy in the room shifted. Jason leaned forward, his phone still recording. "Wait, did you see that spark?" The engine light flickered for half a second before dying again. The crowd gasped. Preston forced a chuckle. "Nice trick, old man. I'm sure it looked impressive in the 80s. Malik stood up slowly, wiped his hands, and looked around the room. "This car," he said, his voice calm yet sharp, "was not damaged by accident." The words cut through the noise. "What do you mean?" Andre asked, confused. Malik looked at the engine again. Someone wanted it to fail. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The laughter stopped completely. Preston's expression shifted for the first time, a faint shadow of worry crossing his face. Tasha's voice trembled. "You mean sabotage?" Malik nodded once. "Yes, and whoever did it knew this engine very well." He stepped back, looking at the Ferrari as if recognizing an old friend. His voice softened. "I built something like this once," he murmured. "You learn to recognize your own work, even in ruins." The dealership was silent now. Every phone still recording, but no one dared to laugh. The crowd that had come to witness humiliation was now watching something they did not expect. A man quietly reclaiming his dignity. For the first time, Preston Wells was not smiling. His mockery had turned into unease, and though he tried to mask it behind a smirk, his eyes betrayed the first flicker of fear. Because deep down he knew. The old man was not guessing. He was uncovering something dangerous, something Preston had hoped would stay buried forever. The dealership had gone still. The noise, the laughter, the whispers, all vanished the moment Malik Thompson opened the Ferrari's engine compartment. Every movement he made was calm, careful, and full of purpose. His hands didn't shake. They moved with the steady confidence of a man who had spent his life around machines like this. The light from the ceiling glinted off the chrome, reflecting in Malik's eyes as he leaned closer. The crowd that had gathered wasn't laughing anymore. Malik's voice, when he finally spoke, was soft but sure. "Every machine has a story," he said almost to himself. "You just have to listen to it." Tasha stood behind him, watching every move. She could see something changing, not just in her grandfather, but in the room. The same people who had mocked him minutes ago now seemed unsure of what to think. Their smiles had faded, replaced by curiosity. As Malik examined the engine, his mind drifted for a brief moment, back to Italy, decades ago. A younger version of himself stood in a workshop filled with noise and brilliance. Engineers crowded around a similar engine, one he had designed. He remembered the smell of oil and steel, the long nights, the pride of seeing his blueprint come alive. The curves, the wiring, the balance, it was his language, his art. And now, years later, he was staring at the same design. Slightly newer, slightly changed, but unmistakably his creation. Back in the present, Malik tightened a small valve, checked a circuit, then paused. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't showing off. He was remembering. Preston Wells broke the silence with a smirk. "Don't break your back, old man," he said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A few nervous chuckles followed. Malik didn't even look up. Instead, he smiled quietly, a small, knowing smile that made Preston shift uneasily. Tasha's heart swelled with pride. This was the same man who had taught her to never lose her calm, even when others tried to take it from her. Andre Bennett whispered, "He's really doing something. Look at his hands." Jason Mendez nodded, frowning slightly. "That's not guessing. That's experience." Malik leaned back slightly and inspected his work. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. There was focus, but also peace, as if he'd found a rhythm that only he could hear. The only sounds in the room were the soft clicks of his tools and the faint hum of electricity. Every second felt heavy, filled with tension that no one dared to break. Preston crossed his arms, pretending to be bored. "I've seen this before," he said, forcing a laugh. "He's just playing with wires to look smart." But no one laughed this time. Even the employees, who had joined Preston's mockery earlier, were now watching Malik in silence. They could feel it. The control had shifted. The man they mocked now owned the room without saying a word. Malik adjusted one last cable and gently tapped the engine housing. His eyes lifted toward Preston, still calm, still polite. "This machine," he said quietly, "was built to run beautifully. You just have to treat it right." No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was powerful. You could almost hear the balance of power changing. Tasha looked at her grandfather with tears forming in her eyes. Her shame was gone, replaced by awe. Malik hadn't shouted. He hadn't argued. He had simply done what he always did, let his work speak louder than anyone's words. And in that stillness, every person in the dealership realized something. The man they had tried to humiliate was not broken. He was in complete control. A faint click echoed through the room as Malik Thompson reattached a small connector under the Ferrari's hood. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. Every move he made carried weight. Every second felt like it mattered. Then, his eyes narrowed. Something didn't look right. The fuel line was slightly off, its alignment too perfect to be a mistake, yet wrong enough to cause failure. He reached closer, tracing the edge of the pipe with his fingers. There were tiny, deliberate cuts, too clean to be accidental. He whispered under his breath. This wasn't an accident. Tasha heard him. Her stomach tightened. "Grandpa?" she said softly, but Malik didn't answer. He was already deep in thought, his calm demeanor hardening into quiet focus. Preston shifted uncomfortably. "What's he mumbling about now?" he asked, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. No one replied. Malik's expression changed. That peaceful, patient man now looked like an investigator, a craftsman chasing truth through metal and wires. He reached for his small diagnostic tool, a compact device worn from years of use. He plugged it in, the screen lighting up with faint numbers and signals. The room filled with the soft beeps of analysis. Andre Bennett frowned. "Wait, that's an engine diagnostic scanner." He brought his own. Tasha nodded slowly. "He always carries it. Says machines talk to him better than most people do." Malik adjusted a few circuits, reset the fuse box, and glanced briefly at the dashboard. His lips moved slightly, counting seconds. Then with a single measured turn of the key, the Ferrari responded. A deep growl rolled through the room. Not a full roar, but enough. The engine coughed, trembled, and then caught life for a moment before quieting again. The sound was brief, but it changed everything. The laughter stopped. The phones lowered. For the first time since Malik had entered the room, there was silence born not from mockery, but from awe. Preston's grin faded. His confident stance shifted as he forced a chuckle. "So what, you made it cough?" "It's still dead." Malik didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the screen of his tool. He adjusted one more setting and checked the readings again. "It coughed because it's fighting damage," he said quietly. "Intentional damage." Preston's voice grew sharper. "What are you implying?" Malik finally turned, his gaze steady and calm. "Someone wanted this car to fail." The words hung in the air like a blade. Jason Mendez glanced at Andre. "You mean sabotage?" he whispered. Malik didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. He returned to the engine, tightening a connector and pressing his hand against the side of the block. His touch was almost gentle, like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. Tasha watched her grandfather with pride swelling in her chest. She could see what others couldn't, the sharpness behind his calm, the brilliance behind his simplicity. Preston's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing," he said, voice trembling slightly. "Cars break. It's not that deep." Malik wiped a trace of oil from his hand onto a cloth, then turned to face him fully. "Cars do break," he said softly, "but not like this." Someone wanted the damage to look natural. Someone wanted failure to be believable. The air in the dealership grew heavy. The employees exchanged glances. The confidence Preston carried like armor began to crack. He tried to smirk again, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Malik's voice stayed even, almost too calm. I've seen this kind of trick before, in Italy. When people tried to claim insurance for a machine, they damaged themselves. Tasha stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You think it's fraud? Malik didn't respond. He looked down at the running lights of the Ferrari, one hand resting on the car like an old friend. Machines don't lie, he said quietly. They remember everything. The crowd was silent. Even the hum of the dealership felt distant now. For the first time, it wasn't just an old man in a broken car. It was something bigger. A hidden truth was starting to surface, and the man they had laughed at was now the only one who knew how deep that truth went. Malik Thompson straightened up, wiping his hands calmly on an old cloth. The Ferrari's hood gleamed under the dealership lights, its engine now humming faintly as though waiting for permission to breathe again. Preston Wells tried to regain control of the room, forcing a dry laugh. All right, old man. Fun's over. You got lucky with a spark. But Malik didn't even look at him. He walked slowly toward the front desk, picked up the dealership's phone and asked quietly, May I make an international call? Everyone exchanged confused looks. The manager hesitated but nodded. Malik dialed a number from memory. Digits his hands seemed to remember without thought. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice answered in Italian-accented English. Ferrari Engineering Division, Daniel Ruiz speaking. Tasha froze. The name sounded familiar. Malik's calm eyes softened. Daniel, he said, voice steady but warm. It's been a long time. There was a pause and then an audible gasp. Malik? Malik Thompson? It can't be. After all these years? The employees looked at each other, realizing this wasn't some random call. Malik turned the phone to loudspeaker, his tone still humble. Do you recall the 812 engine variant we built in '97? The test prototype from Maranello? Daniel's voice sharpened immediately. Of course I do. You led that design yourself. The intake system, the compression ratio, all yours. Why? Malik glanced toward the Ferrari, then to the faces watching him. Because I'm standing in front of that same engine. It's been sabotaged. The damage wasn't natural and someone wanted it to fail. Silence filled the entire showroom. Even the air felt heavy. Then Daniel's tone changed, deeper, cautious. Where is this vehicle registered, Malik? Malik turned the paperwork toward him and read the name. Preston Wells Enterprises. The line went quiet. Then Daniel spoke slowly, gravely. That VIN was flagged in our database months ago. The car was part of an insurance review, suspected for deliberate damage and false claims. Every head in the room turned toward Preston. The man who had mocked, laughed, and paraded arrogance now stood frozen, his smirk gone. His voice cracked as he tried to respond. That's absurd. You must be mistaken! But Malik's calm never wavered. Mistakes don't cut fuel lines, Mr. Wells. Andre Bennett quietly lifted his phone again, but this time, not to mock. His camera was rolling, capturing everything. Jason Mendez stood beside him, whispering, This is going viral, man. People need to see this. Malik ended the call gently. Thank you, Daniel. I knew you'd remember. Daniel's voice came back softly. The world never forgets the hands that built it, my friend. Malik placed the phone down and turned to Preston. His voice was calm, almost kind. You didn't humiliate me today. You just revealed yourself. He stepped back toward the car, reached in and turned the key. The Ferrari came alive. A deep, flawless roar filled the dealership. Smooth, powerful, unmistakable. The same car that Preston had declared dead moments ago now purred like it had been waiting for its rightful master. The employees broke into stunned applause. Tasha covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face as pride overtook every trace of embarrassment. Preston tried to step forward, desperate to regain control. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. But Andre's phone was still rolling. The live stream had already begun. Thousands of viewers watching the exact moment a billionaire's fraud fell apart in front of an old mechanic's steady hands. Comments flooded the screen. That old man's a legend. He designed that car? Unbelievable. Justice served in real time. Malik didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He just looked at his granddaughter and nodded. Let's go home, Tasha. The same crowd that once laughed at him now clapped as he walked away. Behind him, the Ferrari's engine kept running, steady, alive, and flawless, like it knew exactly who it belonged to. Within days, the story exploded across the internet. Clips from the dealership flooded every social media platform. Short videos titled "Old Man Outsmarts Billionaire" filled millions of screens. The same crowd that had once laughed now watched in disbelief. Malik Thompson's calm voice and steady hands became a symbol of quiet strength and justice. Hashtags trended overnight. Respect the mechanic and true genius. News channels picked it up next. Reporters replayed the moment when Malik exposed Preston Wells' fraud. Analysts discussed how the elderly engineer's calm intelligence had unraveled a billionaire's scam in front of the whole world. Soon the consequences followed. The FBI opened a formal investigation into Preston Wells' real estate empire and his network of shell companies. Documents revealed multiple insurance claims filed for accidental car damages under his business name. What had started as a joke in a showroom turned into a federal case. Preston's investors pulled out. His partners cut ties. Within weeks, his empire collapsed like glass under pressure. When agents finally came to his mansion with warrants, the same arrogance that once filled his face was gone. Cameras captured him walking out in handcuffs, silent and pale. Online headlines read, "Billionaire arrested after mechanic exposes insurance scam." Meanwhile, Tasha Brooks's world changed in ways she never imagined. The dealership's parent company issued a public apology to her and her grandfather. They praised her professionalism and integrity during the incident. A few days later, she was promoted to Regional Operations Coordinator, the youngest ever in the company's history. When she received the letter, she cried quietly in the break room, holding her phone close. Her first call was to Malik. He only said, "You earned it, child. You stood tall when it mattered." Ferrari Italy sent an official letter addressed to Malik Thompson, written in Italian and English. They confirmed his contributions to the early 812 engine designs and offered him a lifetime honor of technical excellence. They even invited him to Italy for a recognition ceremony. Malik declined the public spotlight. "I have seen enough cameras," he said softly. "Peace is reward enough." Instead, he asked them for something else, something meaningful. He suggested creating a scholarship for young mechanics who could not afford education but had passion and discipline. Ferrari agreed. A month later, the Malik Thompson Automotive Fellowship was announced, a scholarship supporting underprivileged students who dreamed of building machines. Applications poured in from across the world. Malik's name became a quiet inspiration for those who believed skill and honesty could still matter in a loud, unfair world. In his small garage, things went back to their old rhythm. The same creaky stool, the same smell of oil and metal. Except now, new faces began showing up. Young students, journalists, and visitors who just wanted to shake his hand. But one afternoon, two familiar figures appeared at the door, Andre Bennett and Jason Mendez. Both looked nervous. Andre spoke first, his voice low. "Mr. Thompson, we wanted to apologize. We laughed when we should have helped. That was wrong." Jason nodded quickly. "We saw everything differently that day. You taught us something we won't forget." Malik didn't scold them. He didn't need to. He simply smiled, motioned for them to come closer, and handed each of them a wrench. "Then learn something real today," he said kindly. "Engines don't care about your ego. They only respond to respect." They joined him in silence, watching as he showed them how to align a timing belt. His movements were slow but sure, the kind of grace that only decades of work could shape. After a while, Jason asked quietly, "How did you stay so calm, even when everyone mocked you?" Malik wiped his hands and replied, "Experience is not about age. It's about respect, for your work, for others, and for yourself." The words stayed with them long after they left the garage. That evening, Malik sat alone outside his workshop, the sunset reflecting off a polished red car nearby, the same Ferrari he had brought back to life. He looked at it with quiet pride, not for what it symbolized, but for what it taught everyone, that dignity, patience, and truth will always find their way through the noise. And as the world kept watching his story, Malik Thompson returned to what he loved most, fixing things, teaching others, and living in peace. Malik's small garage slowly turned into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. What had once been a quiet corner filled with old tools and oil-stained rags became a gathering place for young dreamers. Teenagers who had dropped out of school, single mothers trying to learn a trade, and even former mechanics who had lost hope, all began showing up, drawn by the story of the man who restored not just a Ferrari, but faith in hard work and honesty. Inside, the walls told their own story. On one side hung faded Ferrari blueprints from decades ago, Malik's original sketches, rescued from old folders. On the other side were shelves lined with simple tools, rusted wrenches, screwdrivers, bolts. No trophies, no awards, no signs of luxury, just the truth of craftsmanship. At the front of the room, a handmade sign read in bold letters, "Respect the work, respect yourself." Tasha Brooks now managed the operations. She organized schedules, handled sponsors, and made sure every student got their fair chance to learn. Yet what she valued most were the quiet moments, the sound of her grandfather's voice explaining how patience could fix more than machines. Every day, Malik arrived early, opening the garage door before sunrise. He would prepare the benches, check the engines, and wait for his students to arrive. His teaching was simple but powerful. No ego, no showmanship. When a student grew frustrated, Malik would gently say, "Engines are like people. You do not force them to work. You understand them." He taught them that a mechanic's worth was not in what he owned, but in what he created. He reminded them that humility and mastery could coexist, that one did not need pride to prove brilliance. The Ferrari he had once revived still sat near the entrance. It was never driven again. It became a symbol, a reminder of that day when truth silenced arrogance. Visitors often stopped to see it, taking photos beside the plaque that told Malik's story. Yet he never stood beside it himself. "That car already said what I needed to say," he would tell anyone who asked. He never mentioned Preston Wells again. When curious students brought up the man whose arrogance started it all, Malik would only smile softly and say, "Some battles win themselves." Years passed and his legend quietly grew. The Malik Thompson Automotive Fellowship expanded beyond his city. Hundreds of students graduated, carrying his lessons into their own workshops and companies. Some called him a hero, others called him a mentor, but Malik never accepted either title. He saw himself simply as a teacher, one who fixed engines and helped people find their purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the day's last engine stopped humming, Malik sat outside his garage, listening to the silence. The world that had once laughed at him now learned from him, and as the quiet settled, his words carried softly through the open door. "You do not always need revenge. Life has a way of showing every man his true worth." The engine hum faded, the lights dimmed, and the world remembered the old man who taught dignity, not through power, not through noise, but through silence that spoke louder than any voice ever could.